for healthcare.
All right, are there any other public service announcements we need to make? No. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sheraan Amod. I'm the founder and CEO of RecoMed. I thought I'll start with a little story. I studied electrical and computer engineering many years ago. And straight out of university, I founded my first technology company. And we raised funding in Cape Town, scaled globally, and moved to the US, where I sold the company a few years ago. And sitting in New York City, I remember having a chat with my mentor at the time. And my mentor was saying, if you really want to be successful, and if you really want to make $1 billion, help 1 billion people. And I thought about that, and I got on a plane back home. So, I'm an engineer, I'm a computer scientist. My parents are both medical doctors, and perhaps that's how I ended up in health tech as part of my coming home journey. RecoMed is Sub-Saharan Africa's largest and fastest growing online healthcare marketplace and booking platform. We are like a booking.com, but for healthcare. It's really a platform where any consumer can book any kind of healthcare service like a doctor, a dentist, a pharmacy clinic, a physiotherapist, 24/7 from their mobile or desktop. We've raised just under $4 million. We have 2,500 providers on the platform and 2 million users. So we have some scale, but there's still a lot of work to be done. It's very easy to use. Look for a doctor, find them, make a booking. This helps consumers help with access to care. We help them find more healthcare providers. We help healthcare providers see more patients and run more successful practices. Now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, telehealth became really important. And this was a really proudly African success story, because with telehealth we can scale care where a doctor may be in a certain region and the person who needs the care is in a completely different place, they can connect digitally. And this is an interesting story in South Africa. In fact, telehealth was illegal until 2020. And then when we had a lockdown in March 2020, within 6 weeks, by the end of April, the law changed. And it reminds me of a quote. Of course, talking about Vladimir Lenin in Russia now is very controversial, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's a quote by Lenin where he said, "There are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen." And that's what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic in health tech. Now, how we expanded this platform and got this traction of users, etc., and healthcare providers is we took our consumer platform and we white labeled this platform. So this solves what I call the distribution problem. And we went B2B and started providing white label booking platforms for hospital groups, clinics, pharmacies, any kind of medical services organization. And it's important when we think about our strategy of how we want to expand our businesses to choose our partners, customers, and markets wisely. So it reminds me of the second story that my mentor told me just before I left to South Africa again. He said, I asked him, I said, give me some of your best life advice, whatever that is. And I remember he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, son, don't marry for money, hang around rich girls, and marry for love. Now, it just so happens, now of course that's about choosing good markets and getting lucky, but it just so happens my fiance is in the audience, so I'd like you to stand up, please. She's over there in the back in the blue. Round of applause, please. All right. Thanks, Nadine. Now, she's a public health specialist, so whoever said capitalism and socialism are not compatible, right? All right, so another big innovation we made in this business, this is really our barrier to entry, is that how are we able to show a patient after hours a live time slot of when they can book into a practice? It sounds counterintuitive. Most people need a phone, spend a lot of time on the phone, queue. But what we did is we integrated with over 90% of the practice management software in our market. That's the software that doctors and hospitals use to do billings, to organize their workflow, to manage their medical records. And we build custom integrations with every single one of them. So what our platform at RecoMed really is an infrastructure layer that connects up all these different systems. It's a fragmented system into a single consolidated platform. And that syncs in real time. We do millions of syncs every single day. So that deep industry integration is what gives it its simplicity for the end user. It's also what makes it very difficult for us to be copied or cloned. And you find that when you are able to offer this to consumers, 2/3 of our appointments are booked after hours when practices are closed. It's much like the times when we said, well, we don't need to book a flight online, we call a travel agent. We don't need Airbnb or Booking.com. When platforms emerge that allow consumers to do something 10 times easier than before, you can go from 0 to 1, and you can make people very happy and get a lot of users. So this is a graph I like to show of our traction over the last few years, but this is only a portion of the story, of course. We've been doubling every year, and that's just a portion of the story, I think, because this is the real story. And if we start off, there's 2 periods of toughness that you can see in that chart. And I think the first one is healthcare just takes time. It's complicated. There's lots of players. They move slowly. There's vested interests. And right around when we started the company, this company emerged out of an incubator and venture capital fund that I built after I sold my previous company. And we were struggling, pouring our own capital into the company. And I remember chatting with our chief operating officer. And he's a very cynical, straightforward guy who doesn't mince his words. And I said, Taslim, things are looking pretty tough. And he said, Sheraan, I've been doing tech startups a long time. And you know what I've learned? Things are usually darkest before they go completely black. And I think that's very true. Now, we somehow survived. And the other lesson, of course, of entrepreneurship, there's many entrepreneurs in the audience, is part of our job is to just go through brick walls. We're stupid. We don't know when to quit. And that's perhaps why we sort of make it. But you can see in COVID-19 as well, those 2 years, we had some tough times. Now things are recovered, and we're growing very, very quickly again. So I suppose my ask is for partners, customers, investors, advisors, we're always looking for help. And we could use every bit that we get. And, really my takeaway message today is I sit here at this African Union Summit and think about my journey to re-embrace my roots as an African. I present this rather shameful and sad photo that was a Time magazine cover from my home country, South Africa, the world's most unequal country. And whenever we find societies where you get a wall, in this case it's not a wall, it's a freeway, but it may as well be a wall, and you have people on the right and people on the left, I think our hearts have to go out to the people on the right. And I asked myself, what do we mean by access to care? And what do we mean by democratizing access? And we can replace that word healthcare with energy, with food. And I think we all need to think about this. And as I stand here today before you, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, friends, I'm thinking as we go back home to our government departments, to our corporate headquarters, and to our small business offices, I would like us to think about solving this problem. And I would like us to think about working together to solve these inequalities to healthcare, to food, to energy, not just in our communities, not just in our counties, but in our nations across the continent as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheraan. I mean, this should be a human right, healthcare for every person across the continent. Judges, quickly.
So, very quickly, as I look at that picture, I was just wondering, are you convinced that your solution actually helps the people on the other side who really need the healthcare and can't afford it? And I only ask that question because obviously it's a tech platform, but also wondering about the costs behind that, because I suppose a lot of those costs still remain the same. So that's an issue I wanted to find out.
So, in South Africa, for a few years prior, I used to attend these technology presentations, and what they used to always show is feature phones. And they used to, it was usually a European presenter showing a feature phone and saying, this is the future of Africa. Africans will never have smartphones. And this was around everything from, say, 2005 to 2013, I remember these presentations. And they were dead wrong, because you look around, and as I travel the continent, even back home, smartphones are everywhere. And they got that completely wrong. And I think that we need to believe in the upward mobility and this intelligence And the ability of the level of technology adoption in our rural communities is far greater than we imagined, perhaps. And so, to answer your question more directly, a huge number of our users are from rural communities. We power public access for things like baby immunizations and various other kinds of healthcare services that is sponsored by government, but we book that flow into private sector clinics through public-private partnership. A lot of our search volume and usage occurs in rural areas where there's a lower density of healthcare practitioners, and they're not wealthy, so they do not have their family doctor on speed dial. They're a bit more desperate in terms of looking for care and how do they find it. So I think that we need to keep them in mind, but we shouldn't do it purely out of charity. I think this is a fantastic market, and if you solve their problems, you get exceptional usage. Now, in our case, we do not charge the consumer anything. We charge the healthcare provider or the organizations around them, and that business model doesn't necessarily change. But I think that is a great opportunity, in fact, where most of our growth will happen in the future.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions?